Honourable Amy Adams.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, it's my delight to rise to support wholeheartedly the Prime Minister's motion that this House have confidence in the national-led government. And why wouldn't they? Why wouldn't they, Mr Speaker, when we're heading into 2014, into another election year, and the record of this country under the leadership of John Key and this government is the envy of so many in the rest of the world. They look at New Zealand, Mr Speaker, and we've seen this just this last week, the visit to Australia. They look at New Zealand, sir, and they wonder how we've done it. How has this government led us through the toughest of times, protected its people and put us on a path to prosperity? Mr Speaker, take a moment to look back, and as I'm sure the country will as we head into the election, and despite all of the bombastic, table-thumping obfuscation we're seeing from the opposition, despite the shady deals and desperate horse trading of some of the minor parties who are desperate to do whatever they can, at whatever cost, to get back into the Treasury benches, they don't care how much of your money they blow, they don't care how much debt they ladle our future generations with, and now we have a serious question as to whether they even care about our justice system. They are prepared to horse trade to get back in. But, Mr Speaker, here's the reality. This is what New Zealand is going to know when they head into this election. They know that in November 2008, November the 8th, we picked up a country where Treasury had forecast, under 9 years of Helen Clark and Michael Cullen's leadership, we were facing never-ending deficits. We had a manufacturing and a productive sector that had been in decline for the last 5 years, despite the best international conditions we knew. Government spending had blown out by 50% in just a few years, with very little to show for it, actually, other than a very bloated union sector. That Labour Greens government was thrown out, quite rightly, by the people of New Zealand for economic sabotage, for their high-handed nanny state ways, and for their innate belief, Mr Speaker, that their government knew better what to do with the average Kiwi's money than the Kiwi family did. New Zealand rejected that. It rejected it comprehensively, and it did it again in 2011. Even after taking on the economic shambles that Labour and the Greens left us, we faced the global financial crisis, which actually turned out far worse than even it was predicted at those early stages. And of course we had the tremendous devastation of the Canterbury earthquakes, Mr Speaker, that took, or a total cost of which is now approaching somewhere north of 20% of New Zealand's GDP. These are significant hits that this government has had to deal with, and yet where are we now? Well, unemployment is at 6.0%, even though we have participation rates at some of their highest levels, and they are falling. We have crime at a 30-year low, with more foot patrols, thanks to the work of my colleague, Minister Tolley. We're getting more elective surgery, more access to medicines, for the first time decent rheumatic fever treatment. We're getting more children getting immunised, more children in ECE, more children getting NCEA results. We have one of the best growth rates in the OECD, and it is the envy of many countries. Confidence is at an all-time high, and for the first time we're going to have New Zealand-wide frameworks to address serious issues that were neglected under the last government, like our water quality and like the environmental protection of our EEZ. They talk a big game in the environment, Mr Speaker, but look at the records, and this national government has done more for environmental protection than the Labour and the Greens ever had. Let's look at the issue of treaty settlements. Labour and the Greens talked a big game there, but let's look at the reality. Since the treaty settlement process started under a national government, there's been 60-odd treaty settlements completed. More than 40 of those in the last 5 years under the very successful leadership of the Honourable Chris Finlayson. Mr Speaker, that is the biggest single thing we can do to advance the Māori economy and to help our Māori communities take their place as they should in our society and in our economy. We have in my portfolios, Mr Speaker, the very successful rollout of the ultra-fast broadband, rural broadband projects, which is going to improve connectivity for 97.8% in New Zealand. And let's just remember, all of these things that I'm talking about, UFB, RBI, EEZ protection, water quality frameworks, water quality clean-up, all voted against by Labour and the Greens. They voted against them. So now that they stand up and bleat and moan, the reality is Labour and the Greens opposed us improving internet connectivity for 97.8% of New Zealand. Not only are we doing that, and as the figures I announced today show, we are well on track, in fact ahead of our build. We are doing it in a way that frankly is the envy of many other countries who are rolling it out. We've also improved cellular connectivity. We have completed, obviously, the digital switchover, and we're working through the auction of the spectrum that will be used for fourth-generation mobile services. And, Mr. Speaker, I can tell you the requirements that we have put into that auction mean that within 5 years, more than 90% of New Zealanders will have access to fourth-generation mobile cellular connectivity, giving them download speeds on their mobile devices of up to 100 megabits a second. So that is world-leading. Well, certainly it's leading for this part of the world, and it's something that New Zealanders can be very, very proud of. Mr. Speaker, in this year we're going to complete, as the Prime Minister said in his statement, our work on Trans-Tasman mobile roaming to make sure that New Zealanders don't pay more for their roaming than they need to. Again, an issue completely neglected under previous governments. And, Mr. Speaker, in the environmental portfolio, I'll be very proud to be introducing into this House shortly a bill for the first time ever to mandate independent, arm's-length, statutorily required environmental reporting, something that this House, this Parliament, this country has never had. And this is the government, Mr. Speaker, that has the courage of its convictions and is prepared to say, we are not going to screw the scrum if we get numbers we don't like. We saw that in 2007 when Labor deleted a chapter of a report that didn't work for them. We have the courage and the principles to say, no, New Zealand deserves environmental reporting that is honest, that is arm's length, that is completed to the highest standard, that is independently reviewed by the Parliamentary Commissioner for the Environment, and that will give New Zealand for the first time an honest analysis of what's going on in their environment. And can I say, Mr. Speaker, in that regard, that I find it absolutely outrageous that we have members of this Parliament who would look to beat up our international reputation and all of the good work that our agriculture sector, that our councils, that our stakeholders are doing around water management, that would absolutely go out and trash New Zealand's reputation in the media and in the international fora simply to push an agenda. Now, I can only surmise that either they don't know what's going on or they are deliberately throwing New Zealand's reputation to the wolves to score cheap points. For a party that prides themselves on protecting the environment, that is outrageous. And, Mr. Speaker, were that party ever to gain government, I think we should all have reason to be very, very nervous about what it would do to this country's economy, what it would do to the standard of living of New Zealanders. We already know that they would print money. They think that's the solution to everything. We know Labor will come in and throw money around, never mind the debt, never mind the fact that my grandchildren and my children will have to be paying for those promises and that spending extravagance. And what we have learned, of course, is that we can't trust what they tell us anyway. We've learned, Mr. Speaker, that every word that comes out of David Cunlitt's mouth has to be checked very, very carefully. And then it pays to also check with Phil Goff to see if he's got a different position. And then, of course, we need to just double back and see if Kim.com has put a rider on anything that they have to cross-check against.
And is Trevor Mallard prepared to support him?
Well, that's right. Well, Trevor Mallard is a law unto himself. We know this, of course. But what we have, Mr. Speaker, on the opposition benches is a party of desperation, a party that are prepared and have shown themselves willing to mislead, to throw this country to the wolves, to run down all of the good work that this government has done to get New Zealand into a strong state. There's one way, Mr. Speaker, that we can provide for New Zealanders, and that is to ensure that we have the wealth that this country deserves to have, to ensure that we can provide them the schools, the education, the lifestyle, the standard of living, the opportunities that they deserve. This is the government that is delivering on it. This is the government that has a track record that the rest of the world looks at and marvels at. And, Mr. Speaker, this is a year where we'll be saying to the New Zealand public, we cannot afford to put that at risk. We are on a fantastic path. We are on a path that is frankly remarkable considering the challenges that we have come through. New Zealand has every reason to be very proud of the position that it finds itself in, and I have no doubt that they will continue to support this John Key-led government through 2014, and that, Mr. Speaker, is why I absolutely support the Prime Minister's motion.
Richard Prosser.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to take a call on this debate.